Welcome. This presentation will introduce you to the Northwest Justice Project, the law of jury selection, and our work in Eastern Washington. The Northwest Justice Project is a legal aid program of Washington State and works to assure access to justice for low-income persons. Our work is primarily done in units that focus on particular populations or problems. For example, the foreclosure unit or the Native American unit. One example is also the farm worker unit that represents migrants in employer-related legal issues. A year ago, NJP co-litigated a case with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission against Evans Fruit, a large apple company in central Washington. The lawsuit, alleging sexual harassment, pitted the testimony of 14 women against one general manager. Going into the lawsuit, 1 out of the 60 venire persons was Latino. She was quickly dismissed because she believed she did not have the requisite English ability to get through a trial. The all-white jury of 7 men and 5 women found that nothing happened, or, to the extent something did, it did not amount to sexual harassment. Afterwards, in speaking to the jury, we found that several of them sympathized with the older white owners of the farm, and that they did not believe the assaults took place because the victims did not immediately go to the police or tell the owners. After this case, we started thinking about jury selection. We found that there are basically 3 areas of law that cover jury selection: the Sixth Amendment, the Equal Protection Clause, and the Jury Selection and Service Act. These 3 laws define the protections that minorities have against an unfair trial. The first law governing jury selection comes from the Bill of Rights. Under the Sixth Amendment, defendants are entitled to an impartial jury. This has come to mean a trial by a fair cross-section of the community. Under Duren, a Supreme Court case, the fair cross-section guarantee is violated if a distinctive group in the community is not fairly represented in comparison to other groups in the community, and this underrepresentation is due to systematic exclusion. The test under the Equal Protection Clause is similar, with the caveat that the litigant has to show that the process is susceptible to abuse or not racially neutral instead of a systematic exclusion. The reason why the test is different is that the equal protection analysis seeks to root out intentional discrimination on the part of the government against an identifiable group, while the fair cross-section analysis looks to whether a defendant has a fair shot at a jury of his or her peers. There is a law that helps the courts implement the Sixth Amendment and the Equal Protection Clause. The Jury Selection and Service Act of 1968 is a civil rights law passed in the wake of widespread exclusion of African Americans from jury duty in the South. It mandates that courts use a racially neutral selection system based on randomization. Further, it extends the fair cross-section guarantee to all litigants in federal courts and allows them to bring a motion challenging the selection of a jury in their case unless the court changes the process by which jurors are selected. Finally, this law further prescribes the use of voter registration rolls as a default list from which jurors may be taken. Given that under the JSSA, the fair cross-section guarantee extends to all litigants, including our farm worker clients, the next question became, how do you actually prove a violation of the fair cross-section standard? Well, it turns out that the excluded must be distinctive, as in women, Latinos, and African Americans. Additionally, the right to a fair cross-section does not apply to your jury per se. The venire of 60 persons does not need to exactly mirror the community, but over time, the averages of many venires should mirror the community. To show that the problem is systematic, it is necessary, but not sufficient, for there to be persistent underrepresentation. There are other obstacles as well. Ninth Circuit jurisprudence holds that the underrepresentation must be both statistically significant, i.e., shown through statistical reports from expert witnesses, and legally significant, as in it would result in more persons from a particular group showing up in jury veneers. Most courts tend to interpret systematic to mean system errors, such as software mergers that leave out whole towns or knock out people with certain last names. Things that, in and of themselves, are equal protection violations. Thus, a theoretical merging of the fair cross-section and equal protection analyses. Our goal is to use a more liberal interpretation of systematic and argue that where the systematic failures can be pinpointed and remedies found within the system, they should be fixed. Getting there will not be easy. In most courts across the country, if the minority population is too small, it can be excluded entirely due to absolute deviation standards. Additionally, the data we need to show the disparity is often unavailable or tainted because courts do not require that potential jurors fill out demographic information. Furthermore, information about the basic jury-eligible population is also often missing, in part due to the U.S. Census's decision not to track certain information. Despite these challenges, we believe that an effort to improve jury diversity is worth undertaking in Eastern Washington. Eastern Washington is home to a large and growing Latino population, and we know we are not seeing these shifts in the jury pools. In approaching this issue in Eastern Washington, our first thought was, why not use methods commonly used in Section 2 voting rights cases to answer some of the demographic questions about juries? We know that Hispanic surname analysis is 94% accurate, that the American Community Survey can often be combined with the U.S. Census to get a more accurate picture of the Latino citizen of voting age population, and that GIS systems can be utilized to find problematic areas where the system is not capturing the eligible population. So this was our first calculation in the middle of 2013. We have been told that there are so many undocumented Latinos that there was no point to this work. It turns out this is not the case. Citizens make up the majority of voting age Latinos in our 7-county subdistrict. So what is the eligible number? According to a report we commissioned from Matt Barreto, a political scientist at the University of Washington, it is 20%. 1 out of 5 jurors should be Latino. That translates to roughly 2.4 Latino jurors on every 12-person jury, or 12 persons on a 60-person venire. We're not seeing anything like that. Anecdotes from local attorneys put the number below 5%. Here's something else we know from reports by researchers at Whitman, the University of Washington, and Seattle University, that the Latino citizens of voting age population, the same group of people eligible for jury service, is systematically shut out of the political process in Eastern Washington and votes at a very low level. This realization led us to team up with Professor Paul Apostolitis of Whitman College, who heads the State of Latinos in Washington project. The State of the State is a research class where students take on a question of importance to the Latino community. We were lucky to partner with this project over the last year, and this report is the fruit of that effort. We hope that you enjoy it.
Hello everyone, my name is Loretta Velaochaga Klugger, and I'm a senior sociology major at Whitman College.
And my name's Julia Bladin, and I'm a junior politics major.
And we're here today to present to you our research concerning the representation of Hispanic populations in jury pools in Subdistrict B of the Eastern District of Washington.
So for this research, we were able to partner with the Northwest Justice Project. which is a publicly funded legal aid program in Washington with a mission to secure justice through high-quality legal advocacy that promotes the long-term well-being of low-income individuals, families, and communities. The representation of farm workers really informs NJP's commitment to fair juries in Eastern Washington. So we have been fortunate enough to partner with David Morales, who's an attorney in the Farm Worker Unit at NJP, as we conducted this research.
Now, through our research, we sought to answer the following three questions. First, how adequately are Latinos being represented in the jury pools of the federal courts of the Eastern District of Washington? Second, what factors are influencing or causing the underrepresentation of Latinos in these jury pools? And finally, why it might be important for jury pools to be racially and ethnically representative of the population. So you might be asking yourself, why does this matter and what exactly is at stake? Well, according to the 2010 U.S. Census Bureau, the Hispanic population in Washington state has increased 71% between the years of 2000 and 2010. And more specifically, this population has increased from approximately 441,000 to over 755,000. Now, there are racial, cultural, ethnic, and linguistic differences attributed to this population that should be and deserve to be fairly represented on juries.
So from prior scholarship, we framed our research and report in terms of systematic exclusions. And we found the meaning of systematic exclusions to incorporate all decisions that a court makes in selecting a jury and that affect the jury composition outcome. Because we were denied access to information concerning responses to juror qualification questionnaires, our research specifically focuses on the representation of the Hispanic population on the jury pool source list used in the federal courts in Subdistrict B of the EDWA. In order to answer our three main research questions, we conducted two forms of primary research. Prior scholarship has shown that certain types of source lists can cause the exclusion of Hispanic populations from jury pools. However, no prior scholarship that we could find has employed a geographical analysis of jury pool source lists. So by adding a geographical mapping analysis of the EDWA source lists, we sought to identify both how extensively Hispanic populations are excluded and where the problem is most severe. We conducted spatial analysis of two source lists used to create the federal court jury pools in the EDWA, so voter registration lists and the Washington State Department of Licensing list. We also created a spatial analysis of the 2013 Department of Enterprise Services DES merged source list. We used Geographical Information Systems, or GIS software, in order to join together U.S. Census demographic data concerning age, race, and ethnicity at the county and census tract level with addresses from these three source lists, so we could identify the geographical areas where Hispanic populations were being excluded from these source lists. Through our maps, we were able to analyze the relationship between three variables. The first, the proportion of Hispanics in the adult population. The second, the proportion of Hispanics in the Hispanic voting age population that were on each source list. And finally, the U.S. Census designated urban areas of each county. So by looking at the relationship between these three variables, we could visually see where Hispanic populations were being excluded. And in particular, we wanted to see if the problem was better or worse in areas with higher concentrations of Hispanic residents.
In order to supplement the spatial analysis, we also conducted three separate focus group discussions with community members in Walla Walla. The three groups included non-Latinos, Latino citizens, and non-citizen Latinos. Now, please note that the identities of the participants have been kept confidential in order to protect citizen and especially non-citizen individuals. Within these focus groups, we asked participants about certain themes, such as whether they believe that having racially and ethnically representative jury pools are important, their experience or opinions regarding jury service, and their thoughts about the language requirement and the economic conditions about jury service. Now, the point of having these separate focus group discussions was to see if there were any meaningful differences between Latino and non-Latino participants, and to explore how opinions varied among the two different groups of Latino focus groups.
So our first research finding was that there were, in fact, specific geographic exclusions of the Hispanic population from jury pool source lists, especially from the voter registration lists. Our spatial analysis of the voter registration lists showed that the lowest proportions of Hispanic registered voters are found in urban areas with the highest proportions of Hispanics in the adult population. So in order to get a better picture of what this exclusion of the Hispanic population looks like, due to the use of voter registration lists, I wanted to start by showing two different tables. This first table shows the percent of Hispanics in the total voting age population, so the total 18 and over population. Through our analysis, we identified 4 areas where Hispanics are most excluded from voter registration lists as a jury pool source list. These areas were found in Adams, Franklin, Yakima, and Benton County. Now looking at these tables, we see that these 4 counties have the highest proportion of Hispanics in their total voting age population. Adams County even has a higher proportion of Hispanics than non-Hispanics in this voting age population. When we turn to voter registration rates, however, we get a very different picture. The voter registration rates for the non-Hispanic voting age population are significantly higher than for the Hispanic voting age population. The percent of non-Hispanic registered voters ranges from 68% to 86%, while the percent of Hispanic registered voters ranges from 27% to 41%. Specifically, observing counties such as Adams and Franklin with significantly higher proportions of Hispanics in their population, we find notable differences in the rates of non-Hispanic versus Hispanic voter registration. This means that the counties with the highest proportion of Hispanics in the adult population are most overlooked by voter registration lists as a source list for jury pools in the EDWA. So turning to our maps, we can actually pinpoint the exact areas in each of these counties where the problem of underrepresentation is most severe. All our maps show 3 different things. The first layer, the colored layer, indicates the percent of Hispanic registered voters in the Hispanic voting age population. So red and orange indicates lower proportions of Hispanic registered voters, and green indicates higher proportions of Hispanic registered voters. Now the second layer, the shaded layer, indicates the percent of Hispanics in the adult population. So how much of the population do they represent? Black diagonal lines indicate lower proportions of Hispanics, and red vertical stripes, as we can see down at the bottom of this map, indicate higher proportions of Hispanics in the adult population. The third layer, which is these black outlined areas on each map, is the U.S. Census designated urban areas of each county. Now, we identified troublesome census tracts that were colored either red or orange, indicating low proportions of registered Hispanic voters in the Hispanic voting age population, and then layered with red stripes, indicating high proportions of Hispanics in the adult population. So here in Franklin County, for example, we identified the areas in and around Pasco, Washington, as troublesome, because here an average of 74% of the adult population is Hispanic, but only 24% of the Hispanic voting age population are actually registered to vote. So this means that only 3,380 Hispanics are registered to vote out of the potential 14,000 Hispanics in the voting age population. Similarly, in Adams County, we see the same thing, where in the census tracts in and around Othello, Washington, here we have 67% of the adult population that is Hispanic, but only 27% of Hispanics in the Hispanic voting age population are actually registered to vote. So that's about 1,600 out of the potential 6,000 Hispanics that are on this source list. We see the same problem happening in Benton County, where in the areas around Kennewick, Washington, about 47% of the adult population is Hispanic, but only 14% of the Hispanics in the Hispanic voting age population are actually registered to vote. So that's about 360 out of the potential 2,500 Hispanics that are on this voter registration list. And finally, in Yakima, in the areas in and around the city of Yakima, we see that here 68% of the adult population is Hispanic, but only 26% of Hispanics are actually registered to vote. So that's about 2,400 out of the potential 10,500 Hispanics that are on this source list. This shows that voter registration lists are actually helping to contribute to the exclusion of Hispanic populations from jury pools in Subdistrict B of the EDWA. So our Department of Licensing list was a bit more complicated. Our maps showed that there were more Hispanic license holders than are counted by the U.S. Census. This is most likely due to the fact that Washington State is one of 6 states in the U.S. to issue licenses or grant driving privileges to undocumented immigrants and non-citizen residents. Furthermore, a prior study of the U.S. District Courts in the EDWA in 1998 found that while the implementation of the DOL list as a source list did add to the racial diversity of the jury pools in the Eastern District of Washington, they also found that almost half of the individuals pulled from that source list were later excused from jury service. So while our maps show that the DOL as a source list does add more Latinos to the jury pool, without citizenship data, it is hard to tell how many stay in the jury pool throughout the rest of the selection process. The 2013 Merge DES source list contains a total of around 550,000 people, of which we identified 169,000 as Hispanic. Because of lack of citizenship data, we found the similar problem that we ran into with our DOL source list analysis, because the number of Hispanics on the Merge DES list was overcounting the population according to the U.S. Census. So because of this, we conducted a separate spatial analysis of those on the DES source list that were only taken from voter registration in order to illustrate the number of Hispanics on the DES list that we know for certain are eligible citizens. So here's an example of a map from that analysis. This is the area that we looked at before, the Pasco-Kennewick area, in which we identified the same exact census tracts layered with red stripes and colored orange, indicating high proportions of Hispanics in the adult population, but low proportions of Hispanics that are showing up on this source list. So this pattern of exclusion of the Hispanic population from jury pools characterizes both the DES source list as well as the voter registration list as the source list, showing that the use of this source list contributes to the exclusion of Hispanic populations from jury pools today. Now, because I just threw a lot of information out there, I want to give 3 quick takeaway points. The first, when courts use voter registration lists, Hispanics are severely underrepresented in jury pools. We found that areas with higher concentrations of Hispanics are most excluded from the use of this source list. Second, while the addition of the Department of Licensing list does bring more Hispanics into the jury pool, it's hard to tell how many actually stay in the jury pool throughout the rest of the selection process. And finally, the Department of Enterprise Services Merge source list shows the same problem areas that we have found through our voter registration analysis, showing that the use of voter registration lists is actually helping to contribute to the underrepresentation of Hispanics in jury pools in the EDWA.
So now that we've looked at this geographical analysis, let's discuss what people in the general public think about jury service. First, our research through focus group discussions found that Latinos saw that the exclusive use of English was a barrier to participation. They focused primarily on question number 4 on the juror qualification questionnaire, which states, can you read, write, speak, and understand the English language, in which you can either answer yes or no. So in response to question number 4, one citizen Latino participant shared, "There's a difference between understanding and speaking. Because, like, for example, she," as they pointed to another participant, "somewhat understands English, let's say 80%. But if you do not speak, it does not mean you do not understand." According to all three focus group discussions, participants recommended the division of question number 4 into 4 separate categories and to incorporate different levels of comprehension. They went on to state that this question was too vague and all-encompassing and does not give an accurate depiction of the abilities of many people. According to one study conducted in the year 2000, eligibility questionnaires such as this one and constant juror evaluation regarding English proficiency has instilled doubt and insecurity within many potential jurors whose native language is not English. Next, we found that many scholars have stressed the importance of socioeconomic factors and its direct influence on juror participation. According to their research, the lack of adequate compensation for service, as well as the lack of affordable or available child care services, creates a financial burden for many potential jurors. This issue was not only discussed in focus group discussions, but many were affected by them in their personal lives. One non-citizen Latino described how, if he were given the opportunity to serve on a jury, how his work would influence his participation. He states, "If I was a citizen and had the opportunity to serve on a jury, I would, but I wouldn't risk it, because in reality, it would cost my job and finding a new one would be too hard." Now, his issues, as well as those of other citizen and non-citizen Latinos, is losing out on paid work and being allowed to leave their job for service. Now, the Washington state law states under RCW 43.03.060 that jurors must be compensated between $10 and $25 per day. This amount only accounts for a couple of hours of employment earnings. According to another study conducted in the year 2012, there is no employment or compensation protection for employees involved in part-time work, those who work for independent contractors, or those who require child care services in order to serve on a jury. One of the key findings that we identified through our focus group discussions was how participants discussed their feelings about jury service. It was the non-citizen Latino groups who were the most vocal about jury service and who recognized the importance of being involved in jury service. One participant stated, "We influence the lives of citizen Americans, but we need to participate." Surprisingly, we actually observed double the turnout of the non-citizen Latino participants as opposed to the non-Latino discussion, with just hours of notice about our discussions. These individuals, as well as Latino citizens, were very enthusiastic about jury service and wanted the opportunity to be included in jury pools. Now, although this issue was also apparent in the non-Latino group, they spoke primarily on the public's view of jury service as a burden. Now, due to our primary research findings, we have generated the following action recommendations for the federal courts in Subdistrict B of the Eastern District of Washington and for community organizations in order to provide more opportunities for the Hispanic population to be represented.
Due to our spatial analysis findings, we recommend that the federal courts incorporate supplementary or different source lists in order to reach the Hispanic populations that are excluded from current jury pool source lists.
Based on our findings from our focus group discussions, we suggest the division of question number 4 on the juror qualification questionnaire concerning English proficiency into 4 separate categories.
Because both Latino and non-Latino participants agreed that this was a barrier, we suggest that the federal courts provide free or affordable child care services to all jury pool participants.
And finally, because it was the non-citizens who showed the most enthusiasm and who wanted the opportunity to be involved in jury service, we recommend providing non-citizens with the opportunity to be included in jury pools through legal amendments to U.S. law.
We also have suggestions for further research for both federal courts and community organizations like NJP. Our first recommendation is that further research be conducted regarding the political, social, and economic factors in the specific geographic areas that we identified where Hispanic populations are being excluded from jury pool source lists. Second, we also suggest that there should be further research regarding what types of supplementary source lists will reach these excluded Hispanic populations that we have identified. Third, the federal courts and community organizations should conduct further research on juror employment, on the effective enforcement concerning juror employment protection. And finally, community organizations should conduct more focus group discussions in other counties of the EDWA to both engage communities and to investigate if these specific barriers and attitudes we identified through our focus group discussions are common among other areas and other communities. And finally, we believe it's important to continue this research, especially concerning other parts of the selection process, such as the juror qualification questionnaires.
So as a conclusion, we present the following question to you. Imagine waiting for a panel of 12 jury members to decide on the outcome of your future. Who would you want to be represented by? If you would like to read a full report, it is available at WashingtonLatinos.org. Thank you for listening to our presentation.